Hi everybody, welcome to the Mindful Living Summit. I'm Peter Wang, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Healthy Minds Innovations and the host for this session. I am delighted to have Wendy Palmer here, and we are going to be exploring leadership and how to become more embodied in a way that allows us to connect with others. So Wendy is the founder of Leadership Embodiment, a process using principles from the nonviolent martial art of Aikido and mindfulness to offer simple practices to increase leadership capacity and respond to stress and pressure with greater confidence and integrity. Wendy holds a 6th degree black belt in Aikido and has practiced mindfulness for over 45 years. Her organization, Leadership Embodiment, offers training to experienced coaches and facilitators wishing to teach leadership presence. Thank you for being with us here today, Wendy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And Wendy, would you like to start off with a practice?
Yes, let's do a little centering guided practice. And in this centering practice, we won't close our eyes. We'll just soften them. And let's start by inhaling. And as we inhale, let's lengthen up out the top of our heads. And as we exhale, soften our chest, breathing down, thinking of something that makes us smile. And let's do it again. As we inhale, lengthen, uplift. As we exhale, soften our front and think of something that makes you smile. And now with your eyes, just glance around the room and see the corners in front of you, and maybe think about what's behind you, and just pay attention to the space. And be sure right now that you let your arms extend a little bit and your fingers extend like you're reaching out into the space. So you're opening up. Let's open up a little bit. And let's imagine that the space is a support system so that there's like a warm energy in the space. And as we reach out into it, we can let the space support us. Nice. And then let your hands come back if you want to put them on your knees or on the chair. And let's just take a moment and invite something that's inspiring. So it could be a person that inspires you, it could be a place, maybe your favorite animal. And as you think about that, just let it affect you. Notice how I'm thinking about a particular person, Nelson Mandela actually, and I just feel his bigness and warmth. And I'm letting that soak into me a little bit. And then one more time, let's lighten up, uplift a little bit. Let's soften our front as we breathe down. And be sure that we're keeping that sense of being present in the space and allowing the space to be a buoyancy that supports us. All right, let's come back and see how we can go forward with this process.
Thank you for that, Wendy. And actually, I feel great. I was telling you earlier, this room is very confining, and I'm appreciating this room a lot more after that practice. So.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
And it'd be great to hear about a little bit more about kind of your experience with mindfulness and Aikido and how you came into the practices and how it's evolved and the impact.
Well, I began my mindfulness practice a little before my Aikido practice. It was one of those moments. I was in California. It was 1970 or 1969, probably 1968. And I got a ride from a friend, and when I got out of the car, a book fell out onto my feet, and it was Autobiography of a Yogi. So the friend said, you should take this and read it. So I did, and became inspired, and began the Self-Realization Fellowship correspondence course. So that was my first engagement with really working formally with practices in mindfulness and concentrations. And then later I got involved with Vipassana meditation, and then later I got involved with Tibetan Buddhism. So I've explored a little bit different kinds of mindfulness meditation. I felt it was really a way that I could start to work with myself. I think there's a wonderful line from the Dhammapada that the Buddha said, the way an irrigator takes the water and makes it go where they want, or the way a wood carver carves a block of wood, so the wise shape their minds. And that was very inspiring to me because I'd always struggled with a lot of negativity and had some heavy self-criticism. And doing the practices and mindfulness allowed me to start to accept my negativity and cultivate my more positive aspects. So then that stayed with me, and I've been practicing regularly for over 45 years. And it's been a great support for me to deal with my dark side, as many of us have a dark side. And it has allowed me to turn that into compost so that my wisdom and compassion can grow a bit in all of that. And then I started Aikido in 1971. That was not something, again, that was premeditated. It was more, I was with some friends and they said, let's go to class. And I went and I fell in love with it. It's a beautiful art. There's a lot of beauty. And I grew up riding horses, and it reminded me of how you manage power with beauty and flow. It's very dance-like, Aikido, and it's throwing and falling like judo or jujitsu, only you're not beating your opponent. O-sensei, the founder of Aikido, said, the goal of Aikido is to be able to protect the attacker as well as yourself. And I was very impressed by that saying. He said the person who attacks you is in trouble. Anyone who attacks anyone is got problems. So rather than beat them, you want to redirect them. And I love the training of Aikido and have pursued that since 1971. I continue to learn. It's like mindfulness. It's a whole life practice. But my interest really was because immersing myself in Aikido and doing 10-day meditation retreats and really involving myself, I realized that many people weren't going to do that. And so I wanted to find a way to bring the principles of mindfulness off the cushion and the principles of Aikido off the mat and make them available to people who weren't going to do those deep-level disciplines, but still could derive value from the principles, because I think they can make such a difference in people's lives.
And Wendy, I really like the parallel of your mindfulness practice in Aikido. I was just noticing you were calling out turning the dark side into compost and then turning the kind of attacking energy into protection energy. And so that's quite it's beautiful, the parallels in both of them.
Oh yes, there's a lot of parallels, I believe.
It'd be great to hear you talk a little bit about kind of embodiment and engaging with the world, and how we use that with respect to connection.
Well, they say, all the authorities, whoever they are, that at least 70%, if not more, of communication is nonverbal. So how do we use our energetic system to communicate in a way that's going to allow people to be receptive to us? And if they are receptive to what we're saying, then we'll be able to keep our conversations going. And that means we can have some of the difficult conversations. Many people, I think, are not aware of the energy, the message they project non-verbally. And it's really important. People can say, I'm delighted you're here, but they might be closed and slumped and say, gee, I'm really glad that we're doing this and I'm glad you're here. And it's not going to communicate the same way as if I'm lighter, more open, more inclusive, and I say, I'm delighted to be able to talk with you about this and share this with listeners. It communicates differently. And also because of what's called mirror neurons and limbic resonance. These are two neuroscience terms. Mirror neurons are really powerful. We affect each other all the time, non-verbally. So if you were to see me eat a wedge of lemon, your body would go through a change as I ate that piece of lemon. And so they also call it limbic resonance, is that if I have a particular energy, your body picks it up, your system picks it up and responds to it. So I think it's quite important that we not only work with ourselves personally, but we also are mindful of how we're projecting out into the world. And if we want to be influential, which we need people who are creative and positive and compassionate to be influential. If we want to do that, we need to be able to really expand ourselves and be big. And that's an energetic, not just the physical body. There's a wonderful saying that Dalai Lama had. He said, if you think that small, physically small, is not powerful, you've never been in bed with a mosquito. Which I love, because a mosquito is a small insect, but it has a huge presence. At night, if I hear one, I'm like, that, fills the whole room with that. So it's not physically the size of our body, it's our presence that's important. And so that's what we want to work with. And in the leadership embodiment, we're not so interested in going inside of ourselves and trying to connect with all of these internal experiences, because many of them are not positive. Instead, what we feel is that we connect with the energy around us, and we invite inspirational archetypes and characters to come through us. Now, scientifically, we're not solid. And from the Buddhist point of view, they would agree with that. We are made of atoms, and the atoms have these particles, but they can't even find the essence of a particle. Science can't. They look at it, it's a wave, and then it turns into a particle and a wave. So scientifically, what we are is vibrating energy. It's an illusion that we're completely solid. It's not good science. We're made up of atoms, and atoms are primarily space. So if we can start to focus on that and build that capacity, we'll still have a sense of being solid. We're not going to lose that. But we don't have to live out of this solid me, myself, my problem, my victories. We don't have to live from that place. We can live from a sense of that we're more porous. And we can invite wisdom and compassion to come through us rather than self-generating. And the analogy is, if people have ever experienced what we call being in the zone or getting a second wind. So we're doing an activity, we're efforting at it, and then suddenly we usually back off a little bit and we get the second wind, or it becomes effortless. And it happens very quickly. So that leads us to believe that there is something that we can allow to come through us, because many of us have had that experience. The flow state, when we're doing intellectual activities, I write books. So if I'm writing and I'm stuck on a sentence, I can get up, have a drink of water, come back, make a cup of tea. It may start to flow again. And when I have that, I feel like I'm part of something and it's coming through me. So that's really what we want to cultivate, both in our mindfulness practice. In Aikido, it works the same way. I'm a small person, I'm older, a woman, and I have some big guys in my dojo. And I have to let that come through me to be effective. So that's, when we talk about embodiment, we're not talking about our physical muscles and body. We're talking about a sense of that we're a vehicle to allow something bigger to come through our sense of physical self.
That's great. Thank you for kind of explaining that, Wendy. And it just reminds me, I was mentioning, I think the first time we met was after you had led a workshop. And I remember everyone walking out of the workshop was just glowing. And I think they really felt that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And, the main thing, though, is practice. So we want to be able to touch into that, and then we have to touch into it throughout the day. It's percentages game. How much percentage do I spend caught up in my solid sense of my problems, my needs, my concerns, my irritations, versus time where I realize and I remember that I'm porous and I can bring this through me and I can lighten up and I can open up. Now, we're not trying to transform ourselves into people who are always like that. I don't think that's possible. The idea is all life pulses. Right? Flatlining is bad, pulsing is good. That's life. So the analogy is that we're going to pulse between what we call in our work personality, which is a sense of me, a solid sense of me and my issues, and the larger self, which we call our centered self, which is the we, that I'm connected to so much more. So when I experience something, usually I start with a me, and then I can move and shift to a we. So the idea is to go back and forth between these parts of ourselves and eventually learn how to relax with the me-ness, my problematic self, my compost self, so to speak. I can relax with it and befriend it. And then the trick is, don't spend too much time there. Be able to shift to this by doing the exercise we did in the beginning. Inhale, lighten up. Exhale, soften our chest. Think of something that makes us smile. Expand out a little bit into the room and invite something inspiring to come through us. Or think of ourselves as porous and we have this lovely warm breeze coming through us. If we do that, it could take 10 seconds, 20 seconds. We've made the shift. And then we won't stay there because we'll get triggered again. But we can do it again. So that's the idea, is to constantly touch into this more resourceful self, the more creative self, and then not to worry when we get pulled back into our more stressed self.
That's great, and it's a nice kind of repeated practice. That seems very accessible. And your work in leadership embodiment focuses on kind of helping people become effective leaders. Would you talk a little bit about the qualities of leadership that you think are really important to develop?
Well, I would say these days we work quite often in what we call fast-paced organizations, tech, biotech, and finance primarily. And so they need to be able to be resilient. They need to be able to bounce back because things are happening all the time. They're in meetings constantly. They need to be able to be compassionate because there's going to be plenty of irritations that arise when they're trying to meet the challenges of these big demands that are placed on these leaders. And of course, they have to be creative and innovative because these are fast-paced companies that things are changing all the time, and Silicon Valley companies have to really be on the cutting edge if they want to stay valid in today's world. So I would say qualities like that are very important for leaders to be able to manifest the capacity to sustain themselves. Because I work with a lot of leaders who they're doing it, but I will say to them in our first session, the way you're doing this is not sustainable. You're not getting enough rest. I can feel you're taking too much on. You're very attached to trying to get things to be a certain way. And that's creating a tightness in you. And then your immune system is going to be compromised. So I'm going to give you some tools to be able to lighten up, open up, recover your center so that you can sustain these heavy workloads, which a lot of the leaders we work with have quite remarkably heavy workloads. And we're not going to get them to work less. That's just not going to happen. So we want to be able to give them some tools to be able to be more resilient in the way they work.
That's great. And can you share a little bit about some of the ways that you're allowing people to become more resilient?
Yes. Well, I would say, I've mentioned it before, we'll go a little more into it, this idea that instead of feeling that we have to do it ourselves or they have to self-generate, that they can use more of inspiration and have a sense that something's coming through them. So we invite them to find archetypes. They can be famous. I'll share some of my famous ones. I have ones that aren't. But when my mind is tight, I think of the Dalai Lama. I've had the great fortune to be around him a number of times. And every time I'm around him, I feel like my mind just expands. He feels very expansive to me. And when I think about him and I remember that feeling, for a moment, my mind opens up a little bit. And then I'm Irish and I'm very judgmental. And so when I'm judgmental, that comes up first. And then I think of Mother Teresa. Now, I studied her and I was very touched by her work. When I think about her, I have this feeling of warmth that comes through me. And sometimes when I'm judgmental, I'll ask myself, what would Mother Teresa think here? Or what would she do? And then it shifts it for me. It doesn't stay, but I have a moment of feeling more compassionate for whatever has been irritating me. And when I need confidence, I'll either think about the founder of Aikido, we call him O-sensei, the great teacher, or Nelson Mandela. I spent time in South Africa and I saw him once, and like the Dalai Lama, he had this big, warm presence. So when I think about these archetypes, and I can use them for particular stressors, it shifts it for me for a moment. Some people use pets, like they'll think about their pet because their pet just makes them smile and feel warm, and that will shift it. Some people use friends or family members because when they think about that family member, they get a positive feeling. My grandchildren sometimes cheer me up when I think about them. Other people use nature. They've had a moment in nature with a mountain or some kind of water or the sky, the earth. And when they think about that, that changes them. So we ask our leaders to find inspirational elements and then practice bringing them through. So that helps them shift from irritation and concern to something that feels a little more inspired and resilient, depending on the situation.
That's great. And thanks so much for sharing that. And actually, it's very interesting. I was thinking about this, and particularly when you're talking about, thinking about people in your life, it reminds me of the last nonprofit I worked at. In one way, I was flattered. My colleagues said I was away for some planning meetings. And so then they came up with the phrase, what would Peter Weng do?
Oh, nice.
But they came up with it for like how to kind of optimize the profitability of the organization. And I realized, like, hearing you say, like, speaking about this, I realized maybe I would like my legacy to be known for something other than that. So, so that's really great to think about, kind of connecting to archetypes and also thinking about, the takeaway that I just took from your teaching is thinking about kind of, what legacy do I leave from the way people interact with me as well.
Absolutely, yes.
It'd be great to also hear a little bit, from a leadership perspective, to your thoughts on kind of risk-taking and failure and how to apply some of these principles with respect to risk-taking and failure.
Yes, there's an interesting book called Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler and others. And they talk about Silicon Valley leaders that find ways to inhibit the concern, the fear part of their brain. And that's what we do in Aikido. We train to be able to relax when we're being attacked. They talk about how Steve Jobs and so on, took a bunch of acid, and Sergey Brin microdoses acid and does extreme sports. All these different ways that people do to try to inhibit the fear element, which right now in this time could be used because people are really becoming afraid of things like a virus. And how do we inhibit that so that we can access our creativity and take risks? And, I think people like Elon Musk, he just is willing to really lose everything. He's come very close a couple of times. And yet he's changing the world. He's creative, he's innovative, he's pushing the envelope. If we are going to find some resources to deal with some of these global challenges that we have, we're going to need to think out of the box. We're going to need to try some different things, and we're going to fail. So in one of my books, I talk about these Polinsky principles. He was a Russian engineer from the 30s or 40s. And he said you have to try new things, fail at scale, which I thought was a really interesting thing. I tell my leaders, look, be willing to fail, be sure you're failing at scale. In other words, you're going to lose some time and money, but you don't want the whole thing to collapse. You have to...
That's fail and scale?
Fail at scale, meaning be sure you're scaling it so you don't lose everything. So that your failure, you're going to lose some time and money, but you're not going to go bankrupt as an organization or something like that. And then you have to adapt and find a new way forward. So I think this idea that we can, now failure is unpleasant, and we all got F's for failing in school. So our limbic system, our smaller self, has a very strong reaction to failing. There's, in some cases, it feels the reaction is stronger than the reality. And that means that people shut down. They'll tighten up, they'll close up, they'll narrow their perspective. They won't see the big picture anymore, and they won't be able to find creative solutions. So to be able to tolerate failure is really important if we're going to find solutions. Because, and that's something I love about Elon Musk. He's taken the bureaucracy out of his organizations. So if BMW is trying to develop something new and they blow something up, then they have to submit a report, the report has to be processed and read, they have to accept it, then they have to order a new part and put it in. Elon is just like, I don't care, just keep blowing it up until you get it right. So therefore, he can really come up with creative solutions faster because there isn't a lot of that tedious bureaucracy. So for us to be able to take some of the bureaucracy out of our own internal experience, about what will people think of me, what will happen, the self-criticism that comes up inside of ourselves when we fail, those kinds of things are internal bureaucracy. So for us to be able to go, okay, that's painful, I don't like that, and I'm going to uplift and inhale, I'm going to exhale, think of something that makes me smile, open up a little bit, invite an inspirational character, and ask myself, okay, so what's the new way forward? What's possible amidst all of this? So that's what we try to invite our leaders to be able to use that centering to shift their state of being so they can recover their resourceful self and not get caught in their internal bureaucracy of problematic response to failure.
I was going to say, I think it's great how you're able to tie, allowing people to kind of tie back to the bigger picture and then maintain the ability to move on, even in the face of challenges and failure.
Yes, I mean, the neuroscience is when we tighten up, when we're concerned and we use those flexor muscles and we tighten up, cortisol is released. And cortisol shuts down the creative part of our brain, big picture, risk-taking. And we have what's called a narrowing of perception. We're just going to see this small thing in front of us. And if we want to be able to solve some of these global problems, we need to have a big picture. We need to be able to think of possibilities. So that's why we need to be able to extend out, because that activates a bit of testosterone, which gives us like that confidence. But then too much testosterone on its own is annoying. We all know that. So what we want to be able to do is think of something that makes us smile, or think of our inspiration, because then we get that warmth. And if we want to be influential, being warm is key. That's when you think of the Dalai Lama or Nelson Mandela, that sense of warmth. People relax and they respond, and then they're willing to listen. They're willing to hear what we're saying when we're warm. And I tell you, one of the things that I'm writing a new book on dragons and power, and our inner dragons that is benevolent and a malevolent dragon, and how do we really have positive power, benevolent power. And one of the keys is to be big. And I have to say that one of my concerns is that many of the people who are big these days are influential and they're bullies. So I want to put out that people can practice being big and compassionate and warm and wise and creative, and that we have to practice really opening up. Now, of course, the reason I think most people don't open up is because if we do, we'll be visible. And when we're visible, people will project onto us. And a lot of people are, their bodies, their personal identities are uncomfortable with that projection, because a lot of the projections will be negative. So the challenge for us, all of us, the leaders and all of us, is how do we really have the courage to be big and to relax with the projections? And the technique we use for that is, in Aikido, if somebody attacks me, the attack lands in the space, not on my body. Right? So I move in such a way that the punch lands in the space. So the analogy is, if somebody attacks us or projects onto us negatively, instead of letting it land in here, we put it into the space. We even go so far as to say you can have a little bowl or a bucket, and you put it into that bowl and you look at it. And then I'll invite one of my inspirational characters to, I think, what would Mother Teresa think about that nasty comment? And then my body relaxes a little bit, and I'm able to not let it land in me and take it so personally. I can see, oh, well, that's just what the person said, and I don't have to take it on, so to speak. So one of the big keys is to let whatever happens to us land in the space. You can put it in a little container if we want, instead of landing on us. And I would go so far as to say that I think that's important for compliments as well. That we can have a more equanimity with whether people are praising us or whether they're blaming us. If we can relax and have a little more equanimity, I think we're going to be able to access much more innovation and creativity, because we're not so affected by how people are responding to us.
That's great. Yes, and I think the social media example would be very telling here as well.
Exactly.
Responding to feedback. And I'm also struck by this the sense of kind of the expansiveness and the trying to not have the tightness. Actually, would you mind talking about one thing that occurs to me, that some of the tightness that I think comes from kind of the leadership and the corporate life is the kind of like the sense of accountability and the need for severe accountability. And could you talk a little bit about that, the tightness and the expansiveness?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think the accountability is connected to failure. That if we're not being accountable, we will have failed and will receive criticism. And most of the people we work with in organizations, we're lucky we work with what I call good organizations, where people aren't trying to undermine each other a lot. A little bit of it happens, but and so the attitude that I remind my leaders is that, look, your reports are doing the best they can do. And if you want them to do better, then rather than being heavy-handed about how they need to get their deliverables in on time, be inspiring. Encourage them to get their deliverables in on time. Support them. Because if you do, then they'll want to work harder for you, and they'll be more likely to do the best they can to deliver on time. So if the accountability energy is heavy-handed, it's just going to make people tighten up, which then they're going to have less access to their resources when they're tight. So if the leader instead can say, first of all, they have to set the example, right? Like Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. So they have to be as on the case and accountable as they can be. And then the idea is to inspire their reports to let's get this done on time. Let's meet this challenge. Let's be there for this deadline. So that's what we encourage people to do, is to be more inspiring instead of heavy-handed about how they're creating their environment to get their projects in on time.
That's fantastic. I think many people and many organizations would benefit from this approach.
Yes.
Wendy, these seem like very relevant kind of skills across the board. And could you talk about how these are applied, outside of kind of the specific work environment and in daily life?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say that for me, the biggest challenge was being a mother, and just the domestic world in our lives can be so irritating. And so for me to be able to find that way, that when I felt stressed as a mother, like I didn't have enough time, I didn't have enough privacy, my kids were sick or this or that, if I could just take a moment and do the same thing, just lighten up and soften. And then I would say to my kids too, look, if you see me start to get irritated, remind me to center. And they would feel powerful, but it was so great because they would. And then they would see it changed me. And that inspired them to find a way to work with themselves when they were little, even 4 and 6 and like that. So I think in parenting it's great, and I recommend for parents to be able to ask their kids to remind them. And you know what? Even if you feel centered, it won't hurt to center again, because no one's ever become over-centered, and if anyone does, they'll be the first in history. So you can be completely centered and you can still inhale and uplift, exhale, think of something that makes you smile, and expand out a little bit. And then grocery stores, shopping. What I do is when I'm shopping, I practice expanding and including other shoppers in my personal space. Instead of being in my own little thing with my shopping cart, I try to give the message, look, we're connected, we're in this together. So I practice that way. Driving, sometimes I'll practice including other cars on the road, just to cultivate that sense that we're connected, we're in this together. Practice lightening up. So I think in any way, and family members can be challenging at moments, and to be able to let the family member's behavior land in the space instead of on me, and to invite Mother Teresa to be compassionate because I have irritation maybe with a family member. That kind of thing has really helped me keep my equanimity and my connection to people who irritate me, whether they're people around me a lot or just general people who I'm not liking their driving habit. And so my tendency would be to be judgmental about them. And then when I take a moment and think of Mother Teresa, for a moment I think, oh, well, be careful. You're not driving very well. So all of my sort of everyday life, I feel benefits tremendously from these practices. So, and it's again, 1 second, 5 seconds, 20 seconds at the most. We're not asking you 10 minutes, of course, if you want to sit down on your cushion is fantastic because it lets us get to know ourselves a little bit more and begin to accept ourselves. Mindfulness helps us with self-acceptance, the greatest healer of all. And meanwhile, when we're out in the fray of life, how do we keep doing these little quick practices so that we start to change the baseline? And we're percentage-wise running less irritation and more noble, awesome shininess.
This has just been great, Wendy. Thanks so much for sharing in these different components and facets of the way that you help cultivate leadership. Is there a closing practice that you would like to lead us in?
Yes, I will just go back over this practice, and because you can use any reminder on any app, but we have a leadership embodiment app that can ping you. You can set the timer to remind you, and you can do a short one. You can just uplift, expand out a little bit, and settle. Or we have a quick one that we call a lizard push-up. You ever seen lizards do their push-up? So just like ding, for a moment, just push everything out. That's like a 1 second. We have a tagline which we say, noble, awesome, and shiny. And it comes from an Aikido teacher that I had years ago who was teaching a seminar. And he was he was showing this beautiful flowing technique. And then we would try and he would stop and say, now you're too stiff. And he showed it again. And then he was disappointed because then we looked too floppy. And so he was trying to communicate what he wanted, and his English wasn't perfect, but he said, I want to see you're noble. I want to see you're awesome. I want to see you're shiny. So I'd like to leave people with that, because that's a quick little centering you can do. Noble, of course, is the uplifted, dignified quality. Awesome is a sense of expanding out, being bigger, and shiny is the warmth. So I would encourage everybody to have a little more naz, as we say, and just take those few seconds throughout the day to be a little more noble, uplift, a little more awesome, extend out a little more. And the warmth is key, that shininess, that everybody responds to shiny.
Wendy, thanks so much for this noble, awesome, and shiny session.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for the good work you're doing in the world, Peter.